Tonight, CBS Reports is in two parts. The first is on hidden poverty. The second part on defense spending and the death of a Navy Yard. Now, here is Harry Reasoner.
This is the capital of the United States. Under its dome, President Johnson concluded his State of the Union address a few minutes ago. Part of what he was talking about was very close indeed. Not quite in the shadow of the Capitol dome, but almost. Poverty. This scene came as no surprise to the cabinet member most concerned, Secretary of Labor W. Willard Wirtz.
If all our poverty were concentrated in a single area, then we'd do something about it. If it were concentrated in the way a physical disaster of some kind, an earthquake, concentrates its force, then we'd do something about it. Part of the trouble is that they're scattered around in little pockets. Most of us are doing so well, we don't realize the extent of this particular disease.
The first part of this broadcast concerns the extent of that disease. We shall turn a few of the pockets of poverty inside out. Of the 47 million families in the United States, at least 9 million families, or 30 million people, are poor. This brief report is made, then, with full awareness of all that is not in it, including the harvests of shame, the Appalachians, and the metropolitan ghettos, which we have explored before and will again. It is a short detour off the beaten superhighway, a sweep under the rug away from supermarket land. You could start almost anywhere. We start in Chicago with CBS News correspondent Hughes Rudd.
Not too many years ago, when you came into the city, you saw the poor before you saw anything else. Their homes lay clustered in a disintegrating ring around the city, and you drove through the midst of them or rode through the midst of them on a train. But now, curiously enough, the poor have almost been made to seem to disappear, so that today's visitor to Chicago, moving over the broad expressways at 60 miles an hour, expressways which cost so many hundreds of thousands of dollars per mile, does not see the poor at all. The expressways have shouldered aside the poverty-ridden people of the city, and from the whizzing motor car, their neighborhoods are seen only at a distance, a blur of old brick and wood without faces. As a result, it's marvelously easy to feel that the poor have all pulled themselves up by their bootstraps somehow in that much-admired American way, and that all things considered, we're in pretty good shape. But that's just the view from the expressway. In the big cities, the poor are still there, a vast, silent army of them, tucked away behind skyscrapers or new apartment buildings, a ring of hopelessness around the big, booming busyness of the city. This is Chicago, but you can find the poor in any city if you try. But don't look for them on the outskirts anymore. That's suburbia now, and the poor know nothing of suburbia. They have moved inward toward the city's core, because that's where the jobs are that nobody else wants, and that's where the houses and rooms and apartments are that nobody else wants. The poor don't want them either, but they have no choice. The jobs are bad, the living is bad, the schooling is bad, the future hardly even exists. The poor live in a descending spiral, while all around them the economy goes up and up. Sometimes dimly, sometimes sharply, the poor are almost all aware that back there someplace, in Mississippi or Kentucky or Ohio or West Virginia or North Dakota, in little places like Hell for Certain Creek or Paradise Holler or Dead Man's Crossing or Turtle Mountain, somewhere they made a mistake when they quit school. Because the fact is that almost all of the city's poor are not only uneducated, they are not from the city. They're from someplace else, someplace where times were bad, where the coal mines quit, or the land was worn out. But in the city, they learn the same things over again. Coal miners and farmers are uneasy and unwanted in the city, and if a man's skin is the wrong color in Mississippi or North Dakota, he learns to his bitterness and outrage that all too often it's the wrong color in Chicago. The Southerners come here by the thousands, and most of them are as truly displaced as refugees in a flood or a war. The Negroes come north for jobs and to escape their identities as Negroes, but the white comes out of economic necessity. He comes north in an old car he's bought for $30 or $50, and not long after he gets here, the car breaks down. The streets around the sections where the poor live are spotted with these old cars, slowly settling into junk. In the summertime, you see children playing in them. Often, the suburbanite blames the poor for shiftlessness, lack of ambition, and immorality. They could work if they wanted to, he thinks. Well, it looks that way from the expressway, maybe, but it's not that way.
I have done freight house work. I've drove trucks. I can drive trucks. Any kind of a truck that's made, I can drive it. Any kind of piece of equipment I can make, I drive it. I was in service for 11.5 years in the United States Armed Service. And I drove tanks on the George S. Patton's outfit in World War II. I drove tanks in career. I was in infantry outfit in the career. I drove trucks in the United States. And when it comes to work, I mean, whatever a man will offer me work, I can do some of it. I may not do a lot of what the other man can do, but I can do a little bit of it. And I'm not afraid to try to do a little of it. I've been trying to get work at every employment office I could think of, or any kind of work I could pick up. In fact, I'm washing dishes down here at the cafe now. I'm working about 80 or 90 hours a week down there. I'm getting about $20 a week for it, trying to feed my family while I can. In fact, we don't have much to eat. It's beans and bread.
My children eat anything, and we managed to keep the baby's milk, which should be on homogenized milk, but they're on canned cream because we can't afford it.
It's bad when a man has always made a living, tried to make a living an honest way, in a company that I've been with for 17 years, hard labor. You get hurt, and they won't pay you. They won't give you nothing to feed, and it's hard for a man to walk in a place like this, Mountaineers or any other place, and ask for help, which I don't even want to do that. I don't like to go to welfare assistance. I wasn't raised that way. I was raised to make a living, and when it comes to working, I mean, I'm not afraid to try to do it.
So it turns out that the poor have not disappeared after all, despite the view from the expressway. As the 19th century used to put it so smugly and piously, they are always with us. And despite our brave new talk about wars on poverty and job retraining and aid to education, it seems certain that they will remain always with us unless we are willing to make enormous efforts to bring them into the 20th century in the style to which the rest of us have become so thoroughly accustomed. Hughes Rudd, CBS News, Chicago.
As Hughes Rudd said, most of the poor did not come from the city. They came from somewhere else. In booming South Carolina, over 550 miles southeast of Chicago, correspondent Charles Kuralt, off the main road, found some of the poor who never left home.
The New South's industrial boom has changed nothing for the family of Hope Williams. His children spent the year of 1964 precisely as his grandfather spent the year of 1864, plowing, planting, chopping, and picking cotton. And last week they picked the field again for the $3 or $4 worth of cotton that was left over.
Mr. Williams, were you born around here?
Yes, sir. I'm born around here, just about half a mile over the woods over there.
And do you own this field?
Yes, I own this field here. It's about 2.5 acres in this piece here, and we've got about 1.5 acres on another plot up there. Makes about 4 acres.
Do you work some other land as well?
Yes, I do. I work 15 acres, other land. I work this particular land, sharecrop.
How much money do you see, Mr. Williams, in the course of a year with this farm you own and the larger acreage that you sharecrop on?
Oh, well, right in between 300 to 400 when everything is settled.
Well, how do you make it?
Well, it's kind of a miraculous thing, tell you the truth. How I make it, I don't know a deal of time myself. But somehow we barely gets along. We gets along.
Do you keep the children in school?
Yes, the children goes to school. They goes to school. And the odds against us with the school business because of it costs so much for renting books. Books rentals cost so much. I pays $85 for the rental of my children's book every year.
It's a pretty hard life.
Well, I must say, it is a hard life because it's just an existing one. We never really know what living is.
On the $300 or $400 a year he clears from the farm, Hope Williams' family would not be able to eat. So like any other Negro farmer who wants to eat, he does what he calls scab work, a bit of carpentry, a bit of help to other Negro families moving north, as 5 neighbors did last year, and in that way he keeps 7 children in school.
Lord, we thank thee for all blessings that thou hast bestowed upon us from time to nourish our bodies for Christ's sake. Amen.
Hope Williams has very little to be thankful for. It is, as he says, an existence, but it's not a living. It's not a living either for the youngest daughters of James Thomas, who stay home and chop the firewood while their father and the older children work in the fields, As for their mother, she's away in New York this winter, working as a maid and sending the money back to keep the house from going to the bank. It's not a living for James Ream, who couldn't get a loan last year to buy fertilizer, so his cotton crop came out so poorly that he can't buy fertilizer this year either. Joe Nelson's wife and children have been sharecroppers all their lives, watching half the fruit of their labor go to the landowner. It is an existence, but it's not a living. Willie Canty's house was built by his father in 1919. It hasn't been repaired since, as Willie Canty's wife can testify. When it is cold, she says, we are cold, and when it rains, we get wet. The trouble all started with the tractor. Willie Canty sold his mules and went into debt for the tractor, and then misfortune piled on misfortune. So narrow is the profit margin for a Negro farmer that Willie Canty still owes money on the tractor, and now he owes on the farm as well, and it looks as if he's going to lose both.
What's the problem? What kind of trouble have you run into, Mr. Canty?
Well, I was bad crop year, 3 years right behind one another. This chunk went right back down the hill, looked like about $2,000 a year. That just threw me right on back.
Do you expect, Mr. Canty, that you're really going to lose this farm?
Yes, sir.
Well, how is that?
Because I owed a little money on this farm, so many $1,000 on this farm, and if I don't get it, well, I'll lose it.
Would you go to town?
No, sir, I wouldn't like town. I would like to stay right there if I could in the country. I'd like to die right in South Carolina.
Well, thank you, Mr. Canty. The Congress of the United States, in approving President Johnson's Anti-Poverty Act, found it necessary to say in a preamble, the economic well-being and prosperity of the United States have progressed to a level surpassing any achieved in world history, and these benefits are widely shared throughout the nation. Undoubtedly. But tell it to Willie Canty, who has not shared in those benefits. Tell it to the 3 million other Negroes living on the land and trying to support their families on less than $2,000 a year, some of them on much less. You will not find them on the new superhighways of the New South. They travel older roads, which wind back through the woods and fields of the richest country in the world, deeply rutted roads, which lead nowhere.
Well, most of us are not so surprised that poverty is found in the cities and in the sharecrop lands of the South. Certainly it should be different in the golden state of California, with the greatest abundance of sunshine and educational opportunities of any state. But 2,100 miles from South Carolina, David Lowe of CBS News found other pockets in the Central Valley of California.
Very few tourists ever stop in Dos Palos or South Dos Palos on the west side of California's Central Valley. There is not much to see, except if you happen to be interested in what happens when 15 years of poverty have taken root. Almost 2,000 people live here, a few on this street known as Millionaire's Row. But the majority are Negroes who live in the southern part of the community. Many were war workers, stranded without jobs in 1946. They turned to work in the fields 6 to 8 months of the year. In the months when there is no work, they eat greens and all the fish they can catch.
I'm sick. I get a little 40-80 a month. 40-80 a month don't take care of me because I need to go to the doctor or something.
Some go on welfare, but most of the older residents have established credit at the grocers, and when the men and women go back into the fields, their earnings pay off the old debts. Thus they are caught in the poverty circle. They never get ahead, nor ever save enough to get out of Dos Palos.
It's tough. But just to survive, it's for survival, you know, speaking of survival. That's the only thing we have to rely on. In other words, we're retreating.
They live in a community which has no sewage system, no indoor toilets. 80 families haul water from a tap owned by the city and pay $1 a month for the privilege. Some have television sets, even automobiles. The local newspaper wrote that the poor man in South Dos Palos is hungry for more things than food. He's hungry for comfort and starved for respect. And so a television set is more important than clothes, and a car is more necessary than a home, and sometimes beer and wine come before groceries. In Fresno, California, the seat of the richest agricultural county in the world, is a small encampment known to local residents as Boxcar. This is the final resting place for a once luxurious Pullman and several wooden refrigerator cars. In the Pullman, which is over 50 years old, live a husband and wife and their 11 children. The refrigerator cars still have the original doors. These cars once carried fruits and vegetables across the country to market. Today, each car is one long windowless room, a home for field workers, a home as long as they work the land of the man who owns the retired railroad cars. A few miles south of San Jose, Highway 101 cuts the city of Gilroy in half. Gilroy, the center of a rich agricultural area, is the home of 19 millionaires. It is also the place where 76 people in every 1,000 receive public assistance. Part of that statistic are 4 families, 8 adults and 17 children, who live in this camp outside the city. The camp has 1 water tap and 1 toilet. Butane gas is used for cooking. A full tank of butane shared by the 4 families costs $50 and is used up every 15 days. Each family has 2 rooms. The rent is $1 a day. 7 people, 2 adults and 5 children sleep in this room. There are 2 beds resting on bricks and boxes and a crib. The television set and the refrigerator were bought on credit. The payments, $15 a month. We talked to Mrs. Garcia, mother of 5, about poverty.
There are a lot of us that are living on places that the houses need repair. They need furniture. Some of them sleep on the floor. Some of them has a bed to sleep in, or some of them make them out of boxes, and that's how we live.
When you work out in the fields, what happens with the 5 children?
When I go out in the field, they go with me, and they stay in the car while I work, and my husband. And when we come home, they're pretty tired, and they're just coming in and go to sleep. If the people was made up only of couples, well, that'll be different, but some of the people has to have family, something to get along with, something to own, because like myself, I don't own anything but my children. So we have to have children so we can own something ourselves.
If there is trouble in affluent California, there is trouble everywhere. 3,000 miles east, correspondent Robert Pierpoint stopped to look at what most tourists don't see.
This is the New Jersey Turnpike, fastest route between New York and Washington, one of the nation's busiest highways. During the summer months, a steady stream of cars move down this turnpike, then turn east to Atlantic City and the resort areas of the South Jersey coast. But between here and those white sandy beaches, unseen by the tourists, there are a lot of people living in year-round poverty.
This house, on the outskirts of Bridgeton, New Jersey, has been condemned more than once as unfit for occupation. Nevertheless, 13 people, 4 adults and 9 children, call this their home. In Cumberland County, some of these people live in barracks which were officially condemned as unfit for habitation. They were then cut into sections, moved to another place, and rented again. These rent for $10 to $20 a month. Water comes from a community pump open to the elements. The problems here are numerous, their causes complex. Migrant laborers who dropped off the migrant cycle and just stayed. Farm families that moved to cities like Camden and Philadelphia and could not adjust to urban living. They drifted here mostly to get out of the city. The buying up of family farms by commercial packing companies created other problems. And all of it is compounded by the seasonal nature of most local employment. farming, canning, shell fishing. There is some industry, but nowhere near enough to employ everyone. Last year, unemployment averaged 7.2%. But it is not just the unemployed who live in poverty or something close to it. This house in Delmont, New Jersey, 4 rooms with blankets separating some of them, was built and is occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Charles Chance. Both of them work. They have lived here almost 17 years. They have 3 children. Charles Chance told us about his job.
I work in the sawmill now. In the woods together, cutting logs, bring them in, saw them up, make lumber out of them.
What kind of wages do you earn?
$1.60 an hour.
Is that year-round?
Well, I work year-round, but there are a lot of weeks I don't get, only 2 or 3 days.
Do you think that if you had gone to high school, you would have been able to learn a new job and get a better job?
Oh, yeah. But in them days, I just couldn't go. I had to stay home and help out.
Was that on the farm or what?
Yeah, on the farm. Daddy making $1 a day, and I worked for 25 or 30 cents, and that all helped out.
What would you figure that you make a year?
Well, between the 2 of us, around $4,000.
Do you figure that that's enough to raise a family on?
No, it's not.
Mrs. Chance, how do you spend the family's weekly budget?
Well, I usually spend around $20 a week for groceries. I mean, I should have more, but that's all I can spare, you know, about $20. Clothes, I don't have too much to buy clothes with, just something I have to have or something like that, but I don't have too much to buy on clothes, spend on clothes.
Do you get the government surplus food?
Yeah, we get it once a month.
What do you get?
We get rice, and little bit of soup beans, and canned meat, and powdered milk, and butter, and lard.
How about the average day for you, Mrs. Chance?
I get up around 5:45, 6 o'clock, and get breakfast, send the children off to school. I go to work about 8:30, according to the weather, how cold and how warm it is. I build pallets and hammer nails all day.
These are pallets, wooden platforms used by industry for stacking products. They were made in this shed by Ruth Chance and her 65-year-old mother-in-law, Goldie. Between the 2 of them, they can build as many as 100 pallets a day, if the local sawmill has orders for that many. Ruth Ann Chance is almost 17. Not long ago, she quit high school.
Well, why did you decide to leave even though your parents were against it?
I don't know. They finally gave in and signed the paper.
Did they try to talk you into staying in school?
Yes, they did.
What'd they tell you?
Well, they told me to go to school and I'd have a better education, get a better job.
You don't agree with that?
I don't know. I agree with it, but I just didn't want to go.
Not far from the Chance's house, in an oystering community called Bivalve, live the 8 members of the Jones family in this house. Both Mr. and Mrs. Jones have jobs in the shellfish industry. Together, they earn between $4,000 and $4,500 a year. The house rents for $15 a month, was first condemned in 1955. The children cut and carry wood for the stove that provides both heat and a place to cook. The 2 oldest walk 1 mile to the nearest public water pump to bring home the family's total supply by the bucketful. There used to be a closer source here next to this outdoor privy, but this well ran dry several months ago.
People react differently to poverty. Most of us don't even like to look at it. We prefer to ignore it. But to those caught in it, poverty is a trap. Some resign themselves to that trap. They don't fight it, they live in it. They die in it, they pass it on to their children.
This brief guided tour is one that none of us enjoyed, and no tourist agency would book. The man most concerned, not only with the unemployed, but also with the employed caught in the poverty cycle, is Secretary of Labor W. Willard Wirtz, who talked to correspondent Stanley Levy.
We've come so much further than any other nation in history. We're so far ahead of where we've ever been before. We made more gain last year than we've ever made in our history. We wrote our conscience into our laws. We broke almost every economic record on the books. As a whole, we're doing better than any people ever have, and now our problem is simply to see to it that these around the edges who've been left out are counted in. But yes, I think that the most important thing that's happened is that this country is now willing to talk about poverty, call it by its right name, face up to the fact of it, and that there is now a very real desire on the part of the whole country to do something about it.
Are we creating a permanent body of unskilled, unemployed in this country?
Not yet, but there's a very real danger of that. More and more we realize the extent to which this poverty goes on from one generation to another in the same family. It feeds on itself. It's a cycle of poverty, and then of lack of education, and then of unemployment, producing poverty. Yes, there's a very real danger that as automation develops and most of the work in the economy is skilled work, there'll be more and more of a fallout of poverty, which will be concentrated in particular families and particular groups.
The charge is often made, Mr. Wirtz, that there are Americans who don't mind being poor, that they're content with their lot.
There's a very small group in the society which, for one reason or another, simply can't carry its load. There may be a weakness of body or of mind or of character, and after 7 years of unemployment, a lack of motivation, there may be a group, and there is a group, a very small group of that kind. And that's a situation which we simply have to recognize. But I have nothing but disgust for those who refuse to face up to the necessity of doing something about this whole problem, and who pass it off on the ground that there are a lot of people who don't want to work. That isn't true. If statistics are any help, and there are no exact statistics here, I suspect that there are about, from what experience we've had, about 1/2 of 1% of the people in this country, in the workforce, who couldn't, for one reason or another, carry their weight. And I suspect that there are probably about another 1/2 of 1% who, because there's been so much unemployment for so long, have lost any motivation. And I think the problem is that small. And the rest of the fact is that everybody else in this country wants very much to work. And it's only cowardice, intellectual cowardice, that prompts people to push the unemployment problem aside on the theory that people don't want to work. That isn't true.
Mr. Secretary, how long do you think it's going to take to abolish poverty in the United States?
My answer to your question is that I think that we can do it not in a year, not in 5 years, but in a generation which will permit us to attack it on all its fronts. Poverty is unemployment, and poverty is lack of education. We can lick the unemployment part of it fairly fast. We won't lick the lack of education short of a generation, but we're starting now, and my answer to your question is, in round terms, a generation.